Vladimir Putin is considered the most powerful leader in the world today, a man whose single action could trigger a nuclear war at any moment. You can gauge the extent of his power with just one example. Russia launched an attack on Ukraine even while facing opposition from more than half of the world's superpowers. Furthermore, despite the imposition of countless sanctions, no superpower has managed to bring Russia to its knees. At this moment, all of Europe is trembling in fear solely because of Putin. Global media outlets are bent on portraying him as a villain. Yet, it is this very villain who steered Russia away from a crushing debt burden and built up reserves of $700 billion. There was a time when 1 in 3 people in the country was poor. Today, 90% of the population is wealthy. That was the state of Russia in 1990. Today, Russia looks completely different. Putin is the president of a Russia where all opposition has been banned and the entire media is under his control. Despite this, the Russian people love him. He is immensely popular among 84% of the younger generation. The question arises, what magic did Putin work to make them desire no other ruler for Russia but him? Today, we will explore how Putin rose from being a mere intelligence officer to the president of Russia, and how he has single-handedly ruled the country for 25 years. Vladimir Putin was born in 1952 in Leningrad, Soviet Union, a city now known as St. Petersburg. At that time, the Cold War between the United States and the Soviet Union was in full swing. Putin's father had fought in World War II, aiding the Soviet effort to defeat Hitler. When the Nazis besieged Leningrad, they killed 2 of Putin's brothers. Putin was the youngest. He was born after the war ended. He was short in stature, which led to his schoolmates mocking him. From a young age, he heard stories about the atrocities of Hitler's regime and Western imperialism, specifically how Western powers constantly sought to prove their superiority to the rest of the world. Putin loved spy movies. In 1968, a spy movie titled The Shield and the Sword became a massive hit in Russia. It made such a profound impact on the Russian public that countless young men dreamed of becoming spies, and Putin was one of them. He was only 16 at the time. He became so obsessed with the idea of becoming a spy that he went straight to the KGB office. The KGB was the Soviet Union's primary intelligence agency, much like Israel's Mossad or America's CIA. However, KGB officers informed him that only those with a law degree could become spies. To fulfill his dream, Putin earned a law degree from St. Petersburg State University in 1970 and subsequently joined the KGB. In 1985, after joining the service, he was posted to Dresden, East Germany. His mission there was to monitor every move made by Europe, specifically the United States and NATO. After World War II, Hitler's Germany had been divided into 2 parts, East Germany and West Germany. The Soviet Union held sway over East Germany, while the U.S. and its allies influenced West Germany. A wall was erected between these 2 territories to prevent East Germans from crossing into West Germany. This was known as the Berlin Wall. However, by the time Putin was posted to East Germany, the Soviet Union had begun to weaken. On November 9, 1989, the Berlin Wall was torn down and the 2 Germanys were reunified. Putin then returned to Russia and entered politics. His primary task during this period was to maintain a link between the central and regional governments to prevent Russia from disintegrating, especially as regions like Estonia and Lithuania were already on the verge of breaking away. However, a major blow followed for Russia. The Russia we see on the map today was known as the Soviet Union prior to 1991, comprising 15 constituent countries. Yet, due to geopolitical differences, these nations broke away from the Soviet Union after 1991, leaving behind the territory we now recognize as Russia. The collapse of this vast entity severely weakened Russia's economy. Previously, Russia operated under a communist economic model, meaning all factories, industries, and resources were under government control, entirely state-owned. With the fall of the Soviet Union, the communist system collapsed, and Russia adopted capitalism. State-controlled enterprises were transferred to private entities. From these private enterprises emerged the oligarchs. These companies were run by figures resembling mafia syndicates. The oligarchs, who eventually became so powerful that they began to control politics itself. Following the Soviet collapse, Boris Yeltsin was elected as Russia's new president. He was a weak leader and a Western sycophant who, neglecting politics, spent his time drinking and dancing. He sold off all government assets to Russian oligarchs at rock-bottom prices. Consider the plight of ordinary citizens who had spent their lives working in state-run factories. Once these factories passed into private hands, mass layoffs began. Hundreds of thousands lost their jobs, and their life savings were wiped out. They couldn't even afford a loaf of bread. Imagine the state of Russia at that time. The public could no longer trust the government, as it was effectively controlled by the mafia. Public faith in the government eroded, and protests erupted across the country. By 1998, the government had become so weak that it lacked the funds to pay employees' salaries. Fearing a massive revolution, Boris and his ministers devised a plan. He decided to appoint a prime minister who would act as their puppet and do their bidding. The man they chose for this role was none other than Vladimir Putin. Why Putin? He was the chief of the FSB, the successor agency to the KGB. Consequently, he was a close and loyal ally of Boris. Moreover, Putin was virtually unknown to the general public. Boris Yeltsin was looking for someone who understood the system well but remained an unfamiliar face to the people. On December 31st, 1999, Boris resigned and appointed Putin as acting prime minister. In the Russian political hierarchy, the president holds the top position, followed by the prime minister. Thus, Putin's journey took him straight from being a KGB agent to prime minister. However, there was a problem. When Putin was first appointed prime minister, hardly anyone knew him. Only 2% of Russians recognized him. Yet, a presidential election was scheduled for that very year, 1999. It was at this juncture that Putin devised a masterstroke that would transform him into a national hero. Shortly after assuming the role of prime minister, a series of bombings struck Moscow and its surrounding areas. Thousands of lives were lost, and the public lived in a state of terror, unaware of who was behind the attacks. Putin stepped into the media spotlight and accused Chechen terrorists of orchestrating the violence. He repeatedly declared, "I will hunt these terrorists down wherever they are hiding and kill them. Even if I find them in the bathroom, I will tear them to pieces." As he reiterated this message, his popularity began to rise steadily. Chechnya is a region in the North Caucasus Mountains with a Muslim majority population. Russia had annexed the territory in 1860, but the Chechen people sought to secede and establish an independent Muslim state, frequently clashing with Russia. When the bombings hit Moscow, Putin immediately blamed the Chechens and launched direct military action. This move earned him the trust of the Russian public. His popularity, which had previously stood at a mere 2%, surged to 53% within a single week. However, subsequent investigations revealed that Putin had actually orchestrated the terrorist attacks himself. Presidential elections were held in Russia in March 2000, and Putin emerged as the country's president. Upon taking office, he began executing a strategic plan to consolidate control over Russia. His first move was to rein in the Russian oligarchs. Having witnessed how these mafia-like figures controlled politics during Boris Yeltsin's tenure, Putin realized that maintaining power required bringing them under control. Immediately after becoming president, Putin held a meeting with Russia's top 2,000 oligarchs and made it clear that they must stay out of politics and simply follow his directives. Those who refused to accept this deal were arrested and imprisoned, while those who complied were permitted to retain their wealth and began receiving protection and lucrative government contracts. Conversely, those who opposed him often met mysterious deaths, while many others were driven out of the country. The second major step Putin took after assuming the presidency was to bring the media under control, placing numerous major channels under state authority. He would even have the owners of channels that opposed him imprisoned. Through this media apparatus, Putin positioned Russia in such a way that whatever he said became the absolute truth, while everything else was dismissed as fake news. For instance, while global media portrays Putin as a villain in the Russia-Ukraine war, Russian media depicts the country as trying to save Ukraine from Nazi rule. Previously, elections were held in Russia's various constituent states. Much like how chief ministers are elected in our states, they used to elect governors. However, after coming to power, Putin abolished this system. He began appointing governors of his own choosing. In this manner, Putin consolidated all power in Russia into his own hands. Russia's economy relies heavily on oil and natural gas. Around the year 2000, global energy prices surged, and Russia reaped massive profits from exporting these fuels. Upon becoming president, Putin lowered taxes, allowing ordinary people to save more money. Unemployment declined, and job opportunities increased, developments largely driven by Putin's policies. Today, Western nations have imposed numerous sanctions to penalize Russia, freezing billions in assets, halting trade, and causing many American companies to cease operations there. The West's goal was to recreate the kind of instability seen during the Boris Yeltsin era. Yet, despite these sweeping bans, Russia has faced no major crisis. Instead, it has become China's closest ally. Russia supplies cheap oil to China, while China provides the resources Russia previously sourced from the West. Large shopping malls have opened near the Russia-China border where Russians enjoy free entry, allowing them to travel to China and purchase whatever they wish. This is why, even after 4 years of war, Russia has remained stable. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. So, see you in the next new episode. Thank you.